Hello, today I'll be presenting my findings for the Rover Phone Home project. So what is this project about? The goal of this project is to determine the location of the rover based on the data collected from its 4 sensors on the rover, which measure light, sound, temperature, and movement. In the following slides, I'll be presenting my sketched graphs based on research and the descriptions provided from PLTW, and I numbered each graph, which correspond to a site, which will be linked in the works cited. The plan for processing. Step 1, I separated the rover data provided into columns in respect to each sensor. And I did this by utilizing past assignments in order to determine the typical ranges of sensory data and its patterns. Step 2, I graphed the data and labeled the axes accordingly based off the sensors on each sensor. In step 3, I compared the trends and patterns of the graphs that from the rover data to the sketch graphs of each biome, and also referenced the descriptions provided from PLTW. Lastly, I drew a conclusion from my comparisons. As you can see in the rover data temperature over time graph, there's an exponential increase, which could only correspond to the quick increase in temperature over the daytime. And this could be seen in the Rocky Mountains, desert plains, and tropical islands. In the rover data light over time graph, the light intensity was relatively high, and it also showed a dip, which I corresponded to the Rocky Mountains light graph, since it represented a bright, intense light during the daytime, which is interrupted by occasional clouds, which can be visualized at this dip. Next, for the rover data sound produced over time graph, it seems to be relatively high, but it's also constant. And I corresponded this data to 4 biomes, which were the Rocky Mountains, desert plains, marshlands, and tropical islands. And all of these are constant, so it would make sense. So the rover data pressure over time, as you can see, there are many peaks and dips, but there's not a specific pattern that we see because it also tapers off at the end and there's not a clear pattern. So I corresponded this to the pressure graph of the Rocky Mountains because it also represents the constant winds whose intensities vary. And yes, and this is the link to the Google Sheets, which has all the graphs. A few challenges I faced during this project was determining which sensor data provided the 300 values. And I did this by referencing past assignments, and I found that the assignment called the color of light, the user changed the rate of samples collected, which indicated that it was possible for the light sensor to adjust its rate to a higher rate in order to attain those 300 data points. And next, I also had trouble sketching the graphs of each biome, and I solved this issue by comparing 2 locations or 2 or more locations in order to find a repeating pattern, verifying the trend that the location produces in order to make an accurate graph sketch. And I referenced one of those locations. In conclusion, the rover was in the Rocky Mountains. And to answer the conclusion questions, modeling the environments allowed me to visualize and recognize prominent trends, which I can then point out in the graphs of the data collected. The second question, I formulated a plan which helped me recognize how to approach the problem as well as how to organize it step by step. And this is my works cited. Thank you.